Houston. Houston, we have a problem. DJ Apollo has landed. I repeat, DJ Apollo has landed.
And you are listening to the Tales of Music and Film podcast. My name is Christian Taylor, and I hope you're having a very excellent day. And we're going to be back on the topic of music for this recording. I'm pretty excited because we're going to be jumping back in time to the year 1967, and I'm going to be talking about a band I have not yet talked about on this podcast. I'm going to be talking about the first album by the band The Doors. And I'm pretty excited to talk about this one because I've really been getting into this band the last couple of years. And my favorite album by them is their debut album, and it's just labeled The Doors. I have it on CD, and I find myself listening to this album every time I go out for drives or if I'm driving to work. And there is a lot of amazing songs on this CD, so I'm very excited today to take a moment and share my insight and just kind of go into why I love this album so much. I have some pretty good notes here that I found on the Wikipedia page going into the history of the recording of this album and the impact it had on pop culture and where does the album stand today. So yeah, a lot of good information to get into here, so let's just sit back, get yourself a nice beverage, and just listen to me talk about this amazing album for the next 40 to 50-ish minutes. We'll see how it goes. So, to start off, I was really late to the party listening to The Doors. Obviously, these guys were around these guys were around, about 30 years before I was even born. But I did hear their music time to time growing up. But I really did start listening to them up until just a couple of years ago, I would say. My dad played them occasionally in the house. But the reason I got into The Doors was actually through a movie. I'm sure for all you movie buffs out there, you'll know about this film. It came out in 1979, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and it was the movie Apocalypse Now, which is a very, very famous Vietnam movie, starring Martin Sheen and Martin Brando, and it's a really good film. They actually have I watched the full extended cut on Netflix once. And the movie opens up with The Doors' famous song, The End, which is the last song on this first album, and it's my favorite song off the album. The minute I heard this song and I heard the vocals from the late great Jim Morrison, the Lizard King, I was just absolutely blown away. I asked Dad if he knew who this band was singing the song, and he told me, and that's when I started listening to them. First, they led me to Break On Through to the Other Side, which is the opening song off of this album. Then I listened to Light My Fire, which was the single off of this album as well. And I've since then bought, the greatest hits CDs. Now I've listened to People Are Strange, Riders of the Storm, just stuff like that. These guys have so many amazing songs. LA Woman, just to name another. These guys have written so many hits, and for a band that was only around for 6 years, dude, they did so much in a very short amount of time. And this first record they did, you want to talk about a debut album, it don't get much better than this. These guys scored big off their first album. The magic on this record is very incredible. So I knew that when I wanted to cover a Doors album, there was no question that it was going to be this record. While I was doing my research for this album, I found that so many people are saying that, this is regarded as one of the greatest openings for a band ever. And I can see why, because I've listened to this more times than I can count. The Doors' first album is just lightning in a bottle. I know I use that term a lot, but I like using it. just what was captured on these songs and tracks is just so magical, and it's just something amazing to listen to. And I find myself listening to this album, and it feels like I'm listening to it for the very first time with each listen. Just every single time, it's just the music on this record is so beautiful. So I'm very excited to talk about this album. So I thought it would be good to start off and read a little brief description about the Doors and who they were. The Doors were an American rock band formed in Los Angeles in 1965 with vocalist Jim Morrison, keyboardist Ray Manzarek, guitarist Robbie Krieger, and drummer John Deensmore. They were among the most influential and controversial rock acts of the 1960s, primarily due to Morrison's lyrics and voice, along with his erratic stage persona and legal issues. The group is widely regarded as an important figure of the era's counterculture. Now, I agree with that, like 100%. Kind of makes you wonder what would it have been like to see the Doors live. And Jim was always known for his trick and other things when he was on stage. I mean, like the other members, like I've watched all kinds of clips of the other members being interviewed about him, and they all said you didn't know what to expect for him, like during live show. He was a very, I don't know, erratic person, if that's how you want to say it. He was very unpredictable, and his stage performance, I guess it may have seemed strange to some people, including me. I would say Jim Morrison wasn't really like your average frontman. Like, I guess you could say he did things a little differently. I mean, he did his frontman duties in his own way, but again, he was a very unpredictable person, and you didn't know like, what he was going to do with each show. But yeah, the Doors played a big impact. For a band that was not around for very long, like again, they made such an impact that still lasts to this very day. So that was a little quick description of the band. So now that is going to lead us into starting to talk about this album. So, with my notes, let's get started. So, the Doors' first studio album was released on January 4th, 1967 by Elektra Records. It was recorded in August 1966 at Sunset Sound Recorders in Hollywood, California, under the production of Paul A. Rothchild. The album features the extended version of the band's breakthrough single, Light My Fire, and the lengthy closer, The End. Yeah, lengthy indeed. The End is 11 minutes long, and it's still to this day the longest song I've ever heard in my life. Like, usually when I listen to the album, I get about 4 minutes in, then I turn it off. But I've only listened to that song like all the way through once. Like, dude, this song is so long. I mean, the only other song that I can compare it to was Lynyrd Skynyrd's song, Freebird, where the record version is 9 minutes. But I heard somewhere there was an extension version that went up to 10 minutes. So, yeah, those two songs are the longest tracks I've ever heard in my life. And I just cannot believe that it was possible to make a song go for that long. So, various publications, including BBC and Rolling Stone, have ranked The Doors as one of the greatest first albums of all time. Now, I agree with that statement 100%. I mean, as far as band's first albums, like, this album for me is up there with AC/DC's first album, High Voltage. I mean, see, the thing is, I'm not sure, like, how rare it is where bands go big on the first record. Like Nirvana, for example, that didn't happen with them. Like, their first album did not do that well. It wasn't until their second album, Nevermind, when their fame skyrocketed. So, I wonder, like, what are the statistics for a band making it big on the first go? Maybe it's a rare thing, but, AC/DC and the Doors, possibly the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles' first album, Please Please Me, which came out in '63, It sold over 300,000 copies, if my memory serves me right. And I think for like back then, that was considered like really, really good. So maybe the Beatles did do very big on the first go as well. But from what I can understand, it may be kind of a rare thing to go big on the first album. So the Doors worked on the material for their first album throughout 1966 at various locations and stages, such as Whiskey a Go Go. The album's recording started after their dismissal from the venue, having just signed with Elektra Records. The recording of the Doors established the band's wide range of musical influences, such as jazz, classical, blues, pop, and R&B and rock music. It has been largely viewed as an essential part of the psychedelic rock evaluation, while also being acknowledged as a source of inspiration to numerous other works. Now, with this article, the part that really caught my attention was where it talks about, musical influences with jazz, classic, and blues. Like, I can really, like, for example, like, the drumming on this album is amazing. John Deensmore is a great drummer. Part of me kind of thinks that he's kind of underrated in a sense, Because, man, on this album, like, I really get the feel of jazz drumming in this. Like, I think jazz may have been, like, his biggest influence. Like, another example that I can give you is that famous drummer Dave Grohl from Nirvana and Foo Fighters. Like, if you read his memoir, he mentions that one of his biggest inspirations for his drumming technique came from, watching jazz bands as a kid. Like, his mom would take him on trips to a famous like tavern near the town where they lived, and they would watch jazz bands play. And one time, Dave and his mom went back to that tavern for his mom's birthday, and his mom asked him if he would go up to the sign-up sheet and sign his name, and Dave was picked to go up on stage and drum with the famous jazz band that played there regularly, and Dave drummed with them, and that was his very first experience drumming, like for real. Before that, he was just, hammering sticks on, pillows in his bedroom, and that was his introduction to real drumming. And I can definitely tell with Dean's drumming technique on this album, like I can definitely get that sense of jazz in there. Same with like blues as well. Like jazz and blues would be the two I would really say that were definitely noticeable with each track, man. Like, man, he was Dean was bashing the heck out of those drums, especially with "Light My Fire," man. Like, part of me wonders if he had splinters afterwards. But yeah, like you can all these genres, you can really feel that in this album. Like, it's a whole mixture of different music genres. The Doors and Light My Fire had been inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. In 2015, the Library of Congress selected the Doors for inclusion in the National Recording Registry for being culturally, historically, and authentically significant. The Doors has sold over 13 million copies worldwide as of 2015, making it the band's best-selling album. Kind of makes you wonder like where the numbers are today, because that was 9 years ago. Kind of curious to see if the numbers have continued to skyrocket. I would definitely have to say they have. In 2003 and 2012, Rolling Stone ranked it number 42 on its list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, repositioning it to number 86 in the 2020 edition. So it did get lowered down on the list, but nonetheless, this album is still on there, and that's a big significance. And see, so that was just a little prep to show you just the impact that this album had, like, I'll never forget. I mean, I remember watching a little, like, YouTube clip where it was going through, it was snippets taken out of a documentary. It looked like it was made around like the early 2000s, and it featured the surviving Doors members. And the three remaining members were all interviewed, and they were playing their instruments, talking about how they came up with the songs and the technique they used to play them with the instruments they had. And I remember that they were talking about how they created the song Light My Fire, which I'll get more into as we progress through the recording, but I thought it was really cool how they talked about the impact of that song. Like, Light My Fire was a huge, phenomenon. Like, I remember the band members were talking about they'd be riding around town and every car radio in the vicinity was playing it. It was being played on the radio all the time. Like, this song was a major breakthrough. And they outdid the Beatles. Like, that was the part that got me, was, in 67, that was when the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band, which I'm not exactly a big fan of that album. It's okay, but you can definitely tell it was in that experimental period. It was a big change, from everything they did from, 1960 to 66. Like, it was a big change. I mean, it was still a great record, but I think even George Harrison, the guitarist, said that I think he may have said he wasn't exactly a huge fan of that album himself. But I just think it's so crazy. I mean, it's like, I think it's safe to say that, like, if your single beats the Beatles single, I think it's safe to say that you're a one heck of a band. Like that, like the minute like that was mentioned, I was like, okay, well, you guys obviously have some real talent because you literally just beat one of the biggest bands in the world of that time, So I think that's more enough evidence just to show you, like, this album and its single took the world by storm, and it just changed everything in the music genre from then on. So now we're going to be getting into some of the history about how the band met each other, how they formed, and what led to them making their first records. So let's get back to it. So the Doors' final lineup was formed in mid-1965 after keyboardist Ray Manzarek's two brothers, Rick and Jim Manzarek, left Rick and the Ravens, whose members included, besides Manzarek, jazz-influenced drummer John Deensmore, and then novice vocalist Jim Morrison. The group's four-man membership was established when guitarist Robbie Krieger agreed to join. Though he had previously experienced playing folk in flamenco, Krieger had only been playing the electric guitar for a few months when he was invited to become a member of the band soon renamed The Doors. They were initially signed to Columbia Records under a 6-month contract, but they asked for an early release after the record company failed to secure a producer for the album and placed them on a drop list. Following their release from the label, the Doors played residencies in mid-1966 at two historic Sunset Strip Club venues, the London's Fog and Whiskey A Go-Go. They were spotted at the Whiskey A Go-Go by Electric Records president Jack Holtzman, who was present at the suggestion of Love singer Arthur Lee. After he saw two sets, Holtzman called producer Paul A. Rothchild to see the group. On August 18th, after attending several appearances of the band, Holtzman and Rothchild ultimately signed them to Elektra Records. The Doors continued performing at the Whiskey until on August 21st, when they were fired due to their performance of The End, on which Morrison improvised an uncensored retelling section of the mythical Greek king Oedipus. Morrison had missed the first of the two sets that night, as he had stayed at the Tropicana Hotel tripping on LSD. Now, I like this band, I really do, but my least favorite member of the band, shockingly, is Jim Morrison. Like, I get he had a great voice and everything, but it's just like, the more I learn about him, it's just like he was not a very reliable frontman. I mean, it's like, Jim, you just got yourself and your bandmates fired from one of your most famous spots. Like, this was the place where you guys were working on, getting attention from and forming a fan base, Like, Jim always struck me as someone who would rather be doing drugs all the time instead of singing music. Like, did you not, think about your band members, for example? Like, they are going to suffer now because of your actions. You know what I mean? It's just like, I'm trying to look at this from the perspective of a band member. Like, I would be absolutely frustrated, and I would be pretty angry if I was a member of the Doors, because our frontman just got us fired from one of our most famous, venues that we like to play at, Like I said, Jim was a very unpredictable person, and he was very notorious for doing, very bad things on stage when you shouldn't. Like, my dad even told me a story once where, during a concert, I believe Jim Morrison got arrested because he pulled out his private parts during a show, and it's like, you don't do that, man. Like, you just don't do that. It's just like, Jim kind of struck me as someone who never thought things through before he did it, but I don't know his backstory. He always struck me as a very, very strange human being, but from what my dad told me, he didn't come from a bad family or anything, so kind of makes you wonder, why did he do such, stupid things all the time? And why did he always keep getting himself in trouble? And why was he always doing drugs consistently? Was there an inner darkness he didn't know how to deal with? It's just you wonder. So now we're going to be getting into the recording of the Doors' first album. So the notes start off with, the Doors were recorded by producer Paul A. Rothchild and audio engineer Bruce Budnick at Sunset Sound Studios in Hollywood, California over about a week in late August 1966. Indian Summer and Moonlight Drive were the first rehearsal outtakes of the album, while the first actual songs recorded that appeared being I Looked at You and Take It As It Comes. A 4-track tape machine was used at the cost of approximately $10,000. 3 of the tracks were utilized as bass and drums on one, guitar and organ on another, and Morrison's vocals on the third. The 4th track was used for overdubbing, mainly Morrison's harmony vocals and bass guitar. The album's instrumentation includes keyboards, electric guitar, occasional bass, drums, and Marxphone, and this Marxphone effect was used on the track Alabama Song. Rothchild had forbidden Krieger from using any of his guitar effects, practically the wah-wah pedal, on the record, in order to avoid what Rothchild thought was the overuse of these devices. However, the studio was equipped with an echo chamber, which gave that specific effect to the sound. Ray Manzarek, explaining the bass overdub, said, on some of the songs, we brought in an actual bass player, one of the Los Angeles Cats, Larry Knechtel, who played the same bass line that I played on Light My Fire. He doubled my bass line. According to Budnick, what you hear on the first album is what they did live. It wasn't just playing the song, it transcended that. However, session musician Larry Kendall and Krieger overdubbed bass guitar on several tracks in order to give some punch to the sound of Manzarek's keyboard bass. Morrison explained, in 1969, we started almost immediately, and some of the songs took only a few takes. We'd do several takes just to make sure we couldn't do a better one. For the end and Light My Fire, 2 takes were edited together to achieve the final recording. The album was mixed and completed in October 1966. Although Indian Summer was recorded during the sessions, and thought was given to including it as the final track, it was eventually replaced with The End. And I'm actually pretty happy that decision was made, because The End is one of my favorite songs off of this album. And if it wasn't on here, man, I think history would have played a lot different with how successful this record was. Now, the notes continue with the composition of the album, so let's take a look. So, The Doors featured many of the group's most famous compositions, including Light My Fire, Break On Through to the Other Side, and The End. In 1969, Morrison stated, "Every time I hear The End, it means something else to me. It started out as a simple goodbye song, probably just to a girl, but I see how it could be a goodbye to a kind of childhood. I really don't know. I think it's sufficiently complex and universal, and it's imaginary that it could be almost anything you want it to be." Interviewed by Lizzie James, he pointed out the meaning of the verse, "My only friend, the end." Sometimes the pain is too much to examine or even tolerate. That doesn't make it evil, though, or necessarily dangerous. But people fear death even more than pain. It's strange that they fear death. Life hurts a lot more than death. At the point of death, the pain is over. Yeah, I guess it is a friend. That's a very interesting way to put that. So, Break On Through to the Other Side was released as the group's first single, but it was relatively unsuccessful, peaking at number 104 in Cashbox and number 126 in Billboard. Elektra Records edited the line, "She Gets High," knowing a drug reference would discourage airplay. Many releases have the original portions of both Break On Through and The End edited. The song is in 4x4 time and quite fast paced, starting with Deansmore's bossa nova drum groove, in which a clave pattern is played as a rim click underneath a driving ride cymbal pattern. Deansmore appreciated the new bossa nova craze coming from Brazil, so he decided to use it in the song. Robbie Krieger also stated that he took the idea for the guitar riff from Paul Butterfield's version of the song "Shake Your Moneymaker," originally by blues guitarist Elmore James. Later, a disjointed Kirky organ solo is played quite similar to the introduction of Ray Charles' "What I Say." Now, that's a good thing to bring up for a moment. Now, I remember in one of the YouTube shorts that I mentioned earlier, Ray Manzarek, who is my favorite Doors member, by the way, he sadly passed away back in the early 2000s, but he was definitely my favorite member of the band. And the guy was just a musical genius, and man, his organ playing is amazing. I wish I could go back in time and get to see him play live. Like, man, his organ playing style is just so unmatched. And he was just a brilliant musician, but in one of the YouTube clips that I watched, he talked about how, like, you know, the band borrowed stuff all the time, but did their own spin on it. And a lot of people complain, well, that's not very original, is it? But for me, it's just like, you know, bands borrow stuff all the time. Like, that's how music is created. You listen to one thing, and then you come up with your own idea of it. If that makes, you know, any sense. They weren't just straight up stealing, you know, riffs from other things. They just got, you know, inspired, and they did their own version of it. You know, they hear one thing, and they're like, oh, okay, that sounds pretty good. Let me use a similar version. You know, just something like that. I mean, musicians, you know, take inspiration from others all the time. So I think it's a little, you know, misconception in the music world. It's not copying, it's just being inspired to do your own take, you know? But, anyway, the Doors' breakout hit, Light My Fire, was primarily composed by Krieger. Although the album version was just over 7 minutes long, it was widely requested for radio play. So a single version was edited to under 3 minutes with nearly all the instrumental break removed for airplay in AM radio. While recalling its writing process, Krieger has claimed that it was Morrison who encouraged the others to write songs when they realized they did not have enough original material, adding more specifically that Morrison had suggested to him to write about something universal. Additionally, Morrison wrote Take It As It Comes, which is thought to be a tribute to Maharishi Ramesh Yogi. It came from one of his observations on Yogi's meditation classes, which Morrison wasn't intentionally studying contrary to the other group members, but was later convinced by them to attend. Manzarek's organ solo on the song was inspired by Johann Sebastian Bach. The lyrics to 20th Century Fox refer to either Manzarek's wife. The Doors was released on January 4th, 1967 by Elektra Records. Jock Holzman had intentionally intended to release the record in November 1966, but after a negotiation with the band, he decided to postpone the release to the new year as he felt that period was the appropriate time for album sales. For the album's cover, Joel Brodsky was hired to provide a photo of the group, which later received a Grammy nomination. Holtzman also suggested an association with Billboard magazine for the album's advertisement by promoting the record with hoarding a novel concept, which was made popular later on. It was propelled under the stationary Break On Through with an electrifying album. The Doors were the first rock band to use this advertising medium. The Doors made a steady climb to the Billboard 200, ultimately becoming a huge success in the US once the edited single version of Light My Fire scaled the charts to become number 1, with the album peaking at number 2 on the chart in September 1967, kept off the top stop by the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band, and going on to achieve multi-platinum status in Europe. The band would have to wait slightly longer for similar recognition with Light My Fire, originally sailing at number 49 in the UK singles chart, and the album failing to chart at all. However, in 1991, buoyed by the high-profile Oliver Stone film The Doors, a reissue of Light My Fire reached number 7 in the singles chart, and the album reached number 43. Now, I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, I forgot to mention, in the early 90s, a Doors film came out with Val Kilmer playing Jim Morrison. I actually own the movie on VHS, and I am planning on watching it eventually. But I heard Val Kilmer's performance in there was spectacular, to say the least. The mono LP was withdrawn not long after its original release and remained unavailable until 2009, when it was reissued on a limited edition 180-gram audiophile LP by Rhino Records. The 40th anniversary mix of the first album presents a stereo version of Light My Fire in speed-corrected form for the first time. Previously, only the original 45 RPM singles, Light My Fire and Break On Through, were produced at the correct speed. So now we are getting into reception and legacy. In the contemporary review for Crawdaddy magazine, founder and critic Paul Williams hailed The Doors as an album of magnitude and described the band as creators of modern music with which contemporary jazz and classical composers must try to measure up. Williams added, "The birth of the group is in this album, and it's as good as anything in rock. The awesome fact about The Doors is that they will improve." Record Miner was similarly positive to the record. For Electric, it is wild. Rough, and although it's suitable in places, overall sound is torrid. Their blues, bass, and get quite an effective sound. According to Deansmore, the Beatles had reportedly bought 10 copies of the album, and Paul McCartney has claimed that following the album's release, he wanted his band to capture the Doors' musical style as one of the alter egos of the group for their upcoming concept album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The Doors has since been ranked by critics as one of the greatest albums of all time. In 1993, New Musical Express writers cited the Doors' 25th greatest album of all time, while in 1998 it was named the 70th in a Music of the Millennium poll conducted in the UK by HMV Group, Channel 4, The Guardian, and Classic FM. Q magazine readers ranked the album at number 75 on its list of the 100 greatest albums ever, while NME magazine at number 226 on their retrospective list, 500 greatest albums of all time. In 2007, Rolling Stone included it on their list of the 40 essential albums of 1967. Most recently in 2020, online media magazine Loudwire placed The Doors one of the 25 legendary rock albums with no weak songs. In a list published the next year in February, Ultimate Classic Rock cited it as the fourth top psychedelic rock album of all time. Now, if that doesn't tell you, the impact of this album, I don't know if anything will. To this very day, over 50 plus years later, the album is still making historically and amazingly awesome history. So this will always be my favorite Doors album. If you have not listened to the first album by the Doors, I highly recommend you give it a listen. There are so many tracks on here that stood the test of time. Like, there's a few others on here that I haven't mentioned. Like, we all know, Light My Fire, The End, and Break On Through. But Soul Kitchen, like, dude, that's one of my favorite Doors songs. Like, if you have not listened to Soul Kitchen, that's another good one. That was a quick song that I wanted to mention right quick. Like, that, it's a great song. I think it deserves a lot of recognition. I'm actually kind of surprised it wasn't a single. It's a great song, and I think Manzarek's, keyboarding on that one it really stands out compared to the other songs on the album, but, still. Just wanted to give that track a quick shout out. So that about wraps it up for the covering of the first album by The Doors, and it is an amazing debut record, and the band members should be very proud of themselves. But sadly, today, there are only 2 remaining members left from The Doors, and they are Robbie Krieger and John Deansmore. And, of course, Jim Morrison was the first out of the band to die. He passed away on July 3rd, 1971. And he is part of the 27 Club, which is a series of musicians all throughout history who all passed away at the age of 27. And this has been a very recurring theme over the years, and it's pretty scary, like, just how many musicians have passed away at the age of 27. Some other famous musicians who are part of the 27 Club are Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Kurt Cobain, just to name a few. And the cause of death for Jim Morrison was labeled as congestive heart failure, and it seems that he also drowned in his bathtub while he was bathing. So that was his official cause of death, and it's really sad, I remember, watching clips about, the band members talking about, the plans that they had to record more stuff with Jim, and it never got to be a thing, Like, it's always extremely sad. Like, I can only imagine what the other band members must have felt, when Jim died. It was a huge loss. Like, I did think that he was a very strange man, but he didn't deserve to die. Like, no one deserves to die. And, my condolences go out to his family. Like, that's just horrible. He was so young, just getting his life started. He had so much more to do, so just, it's extremely sad that his life was cut so short. And I hope he rests in peace. And the other Doors member to pass away was Ray Manzarek, who was the keyboard player. He passed away at the age of 74 on May 20th, 2013. And it seems that he died from cancer. And it's really sad that he is also gone. It would have been an extreme honor to meet him, because if you watch like any interview clips with him, the guy was a musical genius and he knew his craft. Like he really reminded me of Neil Peart from the band Rush, who was Rush's drummer. Like, he was just so smart and articulate. Like, I'm curious to know, like, what was Ray's like IQ level? Because the guy is just like, my gosh, he knew his craft. Like, he did his research. Like, the guy was musically talented beyond belief, and it would have been an honor, to shake his hand and talk to him for like 5 minutes. Like, that would have been cool. But yeah, rest in peace, Ray. You were an amazing keyboardist and a beautiful human being, and I hope you rest in peace too. So that leaves Robbie Krieger, who's still alive today. He's currently 78 years old. And John Deansmore, he's still alive today, and he is 79 years old. So I think it's still really cool that we still have half the band still with us today. And so I just want to go through the band's lineup one more time and just mention what they were. So Jim Morrison was was a songwriter and the lead singer for the Doors. Ray Manzarek was the keyboard player for the band. Robbie Krieger was the guitar player. And lastly, John Deansmore was the drummer. And what a fantastic lineup, man. Like, these guys had great chemistry. Like, when these guys got together and made music, like, man, it was just pure magic. And like the Doors' 6 like main albums that they did are all extremely well made, and they are just pure quality. Their other albums were L.A. Woman from 1971, Strange Days from 1967, Waiting for the Sun in 1968, and The Soft Parade in 1969, and then Morrison Hotel in 1970. Just amazing pieces of art, amazing stuff. And these albums are extremely well made, and I need to get back to I need to listen to them again. Like, I've seen these albums in like record stores before, but man, the prices for vinyls today are just insane. Like, we're talking like anywhere between $20 to $30, and I'm just like, my gosh, like, you remember the good old days when vinyls were like $10 or $5? Like, my gosh, how much I wish we could go back to those prices, but unfortunately not. Like, I mean, heck, I work at a Walmart and vinyl's like, $30 plus. It is insane. But yeah, I need to give their other vinyls a listen. Like, I do have the Doors' greatest hits CD in my CD collection, so I'll definitely have to give it a listen sometime. But yeah, these guys, I can honestly say with the Doors, they are another one of those bands where I don't believe that they have written one bad song. I mean, everything they've made every song that these guys have ever written are all amazing in their own ways. So if you have not listened to the Doors at all, I highly recommend you give them a listen. It'll take you back to that late 60s rock and roll feel, and their songs really stand out, and they have aged extremely well. So that is going to wrap it up for the covering of the first album by The Doors. I hope you enjoyed this recording. I have many new topics on the way that I cannot wait to share with you, and we are going to have ourselves some fun just like we always do. So thank you for listening to this recording, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned some pretty cool information about the making of this amazing album. So, until next time, my name is Christian Taylor, and you are listening to the Tales of Music and Film.